In 1996, Mainframe Entertainment, hot off of creating Reboot, one of the great little gems of computer animated kids shows from the 90s, jumped into a much bigger franchise and produced something that was way better than it had any right to be. I am talking today about Beast Wars Transformers. Now, a little background for you. 1996. I'm an adult. I'm out of college. I got a job. I got a wife. No kid yet. I haven't looked at or thought about the Transformers for a long time. Probably a good decade. Sitting on the couch one morning, getting ready to go to work, eating a little cereal. And for whatever reason, this show comes on the TV. What in the heck is this? Now, I'm not the biggest fan in the world of computer animation, especially the early stuff. It was interesting. It was sort of a novelty, sort of a gimmick. Obviously, it was going to become much more than that, but at the time, it didn't always look that great. I had no particular interest at that point in the Transformers, but I gotta say, this show actually captured my attention a little bit. Now, I watched it maybe sporadically at the time. I just recently sat back down to watch it from episode 1 all the way through. And I gotta say that it is, well, like I said before, way better than it had any right to be. It is a legit sci-fi show, not just a kid's cartoon. It is better than the original Transformers from a character and storytelling perspective. Still got a lot of nostalgia for the Transformers, but Beast Wars outdoes it quite a bit in terms of story. It's so good, in fact, that I actually recently bought a toy of my favorite character from the series, Rhinox. Hey, it was on sale, and I couldn't help it. But no, this show I think deserves another look for those who have never watched it, for those who aren't, say, a millennial who grew up on it. And if you are a millennial who grew up on it, but you haven't seen it in a long time, Beast Wars and its follow-up, Beast Machines, I think are worth a watch, maybe even something you want to introduce your kids to. Beast Machines, in particular, it resonates at this moment in time quite a bit, but we'll get to that. So what is it? Well, Beast Wars, again, 1996 is when it shows up. Ultimately gets 52 episodes over 3 seasons, developed by Larry DiTillio and Bob Forward. Now, when I saw Larry DiTillio's name, I go, ooh, I know that name. How do I know that name? He did some role-playing game work at a certain point. I believe it started when there was a TV writers' strike. And that's where I knew the name from. But I wasn't familiar with his other work, other than, to some degree, Beast Wars. Also got some writing over the course of the series by Marv Wolfman and Lynn Wein, who, comic book folks will definitely know. One episode was even written by a fellow by the name of Roby Gorin, who wrote for Laugh-In. Strangely enough. It won a Daytime Emmy Award for animation in 1997, so it was recognized, I think, at the time. But maybe that was somewhat because of the novelty of it being a computer animated show. I don't know how closely they watched it for the Daytime Emmys at the time. But I think it really has a lot to offer in a few different regards. Now, it's a continuation of the G1 Transformers, and time comes into this. It begins with 2 spaceships over a planet with 2 moons. In one, we have the heroic Maximals. In the other, we have the villainous Predicons. And they're fighting, and their ships crash. And the arc of the Maximals lets go a bunch of these stasis pods into orbit, and that will come into the series later on. And so these ships crash, and we're introduced to the Beast Wars. The good guys are the Maximals, the bad guys are the Predicons. The Maximals obviously are sort of the heirs to the Autobots, the Predicons to the Decepticons. And in fact, the leader of the Maximals is Optimus Primal, and the leader of the Decepticons is Megatron. And I think when I first saw episodes, and I think the first ones I saw were maybe in the second season, they could have even been in the third. When I first saw characters being called Optimus and Megatron, my first thought was like, oh my God, what did they do to these characters? They don't sound right. You're not going to find better voices for, than the original Optimus and Megatron. They look kind of goofy. Like, what is that? Well, at the time I didn't realize these are new characters. Megatron simply is the namesake to the original Megatron. And so, first season is pretty standard kids sci-fi, setting up the characters, having the two sides battling over energy. But by the end of that first season, it kind of gets interesting as we have the involvement of aliens. And we also early on get one of the Predicons joining the Maximal side, primarily because he wanted to fight, Megatron for control and lost and had nowhere else to go. And so it's not like he suddenly embraces goodness. He's this Predacon warrior, and he's, kind of a jerk, but he's stuck with the Maximals. His character's called Dinobot. And he becomes rather interesting and has a pretty good character arc. And as you can see, the animation and design at the time was a little bit janky, but, it's also pretty good for the time. And over the course of the series, especially when you get into the follow-up series, you can see the work improving. You can see the animators getting a hold of these characters and really seeing what they could do with them. And the animation does improve quite a bit. And so I think that if you're into sort of the history of computer animation, this is one of those shows you really probably should sit and watch and see how these guys do it. Because, if there's a weakness to computer animation, it is build a model and have the model walk around. And these guys early on start playing with the models a little bit. Sometimes in a sort of comical Looney Tunes way, people flattening themselves against a cliff or a tree. But it was interesting to see them, figuring out, how do we do that in this medium? How do we make this work? The character designs are based very much on the toys. Now, if you remember from, the original Transformers cartoon, there could be a big difference between what the character looked like in the cartoon versus what the toy looked like. I mean, Megatron would have been a much goofier looking character if he'd looked just like the toy. Now, of course, we get companies making new Transformers that look just like the cartoon, but then turn into what the toy looked like, more or less. And they're usually quite expensive, these toys. These guys, though, had to work with, these models of what these characters actually looked like as toys. And those could be a little bit goofy, to be quite frank. And it was probably difficult to animate them in a realistic, satisfying manner, but they really got pretty good at it as the show went on. And on top of that, they did quite a bit with character and character development. Now, some of the changes in the characters were because the toys changed. And it always was like, God, they're just getting good at animating this character. And now you've gone and changed, what he looks like. But they did develop the characters. And I think far more than you got like in the 1980s. when the Transformers cartoon was very much a commercial for the toys, but it was a decent cartoon, and it hit on important themes of the 1980s. A lot of that had to do with acceptance of people as individuals, things of that nature. Beast Wars and Beast Machines gets into, I think, headier sort of material, both from a sci-fi stance. Again, I mentioned these aliens that at one point, a little spoilery here, you do find out that despite this being a planet with apparently 2 moons, it is in fact very ancient Earth, or maybe we would call it, primitive Earth. And that has to do with an alien species that we never really meet, and these golden discs, and a lot of elements of sci-fi adapted into this cartoon, that made it very, very interesting. And so it starts with sort of this battle of good guys and bad guys on this planet, somewhat over energy sources, and it becomes a lot more. It becomes sort of a battle for the future. Again, time travel does come into this, and not in a silly way per se, but if you'll recall, in the original Transformers cartoon, Decepticons attacking Autobots, and they crash on primitive Earth, and they're sort of, for lack of a better term, they're knocked out. And then thousands, millions of years later, they're awakened. An earthquake jostles awake the computer on the Autobot ship that everybody was on, and it goes into the repair mode, and it repairs all of the Autobots, and it gives them new forms based upon the cars, trucks, airplanes, etc. that are buzzing around planet Earth at the time. And reawakened, they battle, and eventually you get this victory for the Autobots on Cybertron. Okay. With Beast Wars, we're starting after that point in time, when these characters that we knew, Gen X knew, are somewhat legendary. They end up, I guess because of space warp or what have you, they end up crashing on primitive Earth as well, although they don't immediately know that, and it is revealed over the course of many episodes. And we even, at a certain point, we get to meet, sort of meet, the G1 Transformers of Gen X's childhood. We'll get to that in a little bit. But we do go through many changes of these characters. And some of them, like I said, are superficial changes. But some of them also are character development. And the show does hit on some very interesting themes. Nature versus technology, things of that nature. And the importance of protecting the natural world, which was obviously a big deal at the time, and it's a big deal now, although maybe it takes different forms. And they have an interesting way with those stasis pods of introducing new characters, and I'll give them a lot of credit for that one, because obviously as new toys come out, you need to have them show up. Now, on the old show, it's just all of a sudden there are characters there that you had never seen before. And where do these guys come from? I have no idea. On this one, stasis pods would sometimes land. They would fall to Earth. And then it was a race to get there to claim them. Because whoever gets there first can claim that spark, that soul inside this little stasis pod as a Maximal or as a Predicon, even though all of them initially are Maximals. And that leads to one of the other, I think, pretty interesting characters. Well, Tigertron is one of them, who sort of becomes more tiger in some ways than robot, and is sort of a fierce protector of the natural world and of the primitive hominids who live on that natural world. Dinobot actually has an extremely good episode defending these creatures that he doesn't necessarily care about. But Oh, and there we have. Okay, so I'm looking for a particular character who I thought I put the picture in earlier. Very professional, folks. There we actually see, at one point we do get to see Optimus and Megatron still unconscious at this point. And that has a big element of the theme of protecting their past to preserve their present and their future, from the new Megatron, who would just as soon wipe it all out. And it's a good element of the series because we get a lot of reverence for the original Transformers. This is not a sort of, screw that stuff, we're going to remake it and do better. No, man, it's legit. And I remember seeing that one day, sitting on that couch, kind of being like, dude, Optimus Prime. It was like that sort of awakens that old nostalgia you had for those characters. And you do get a lot of characters in this show, again, who don't survive the Beast Wars. And I thought that was a pretty mature thing to do, and make characters deal with that, or children, viewers, deal with those losses. Not everybody ultimately makes it through the Beast Wars, and nobody's unscathed. But back to that theme of Maximals who become Predicons, one of the more interesting characters in the series, and I think a fan favorite, was Black Arachnia, who takes the form of a spider in her beast mode. Now, she's one of those stasis pods that is ultimately corrupted, and she comes out of Predacon. And great character. Of course, being one of the bad guys, they're all gunning for Megatron. They're all gunning for power. They're all gunning for control, right? I mean, selfishness is kind of, in many ways, the core of what evil is. Elevating yourself above all others, elevating yourself above reality itself to some degree. And over the course of the series, Black Arachnia encounters a character called Silverbolt. And Silverbolt is like the epitome of the White Knight, the shining hero. He's like Superman. He's unironically good. Even has a voice that sort of talks to that. And he takes an immediate liking to Black Arachnia and knows that she was meant to be a Maximal. And she's like, she can't stand this guy. She's got that cynical sort of thing going. But that becomes a thing, and that goes through this series and through Beast Machines, this sort of journey of these two characters, and his ultimately winning her, both as a mate, I guess would be the best word to use, but also from evil. And I think it's a great theme of the series of, like I said, selfishness being core to the idea of evil. And how do you win people from that? Well, it's with connection, a deep connection. Again, we're not talking about something like lust, where you simply objectify another person, but love, where that person becomes as valuable or often more valuable to you than you. And see, that opens the door to wisdom, to understanding. You're not above everybody else. You're one among billions. And if we're talking about a populated universe, trillions, quadrillions, who knows how many people. And that sort of wins her away, but she doesn't lose her personality. She retains an edge and really becomes a great character and a very fun character throughout. And goes through some real emotional stuff in Beast Machines as a result of all this. And that's kind of my point. Like, all this had to be was a cartoon that was a commercial for toys. And the writers make it so much more, with real character development, with real emotional moments, with real loss, with interesting sci-fi stories, and actually also some decent comedy. And if you're a nerd, You get some nice little references in it to stuff. Rat on a Stick comes up, and that's a pretty deep reference to old school gaming. I think they refer to Rat Trap at one point as a stainless steel rat. And there's many more than that. And it also pokes a little fun at itself. I think one time there's something to the extent of, how many times is Optimus going to change the way he looks? Because it happens often over the course of this series. Obviously not because of what the makers of the series wanted to do, but because of what the makers of the toys and the owners of the series wanted to do. But there's a lot of that. And like I said, there's also comedy, some of it kind of Looney Tunes-esque. It's just fun to watch the animators kind of play with these characters and do all that stuff. There's also a character called Inferno, who is a Predicon, takes the form of an ant. And they get to him a little bit late, so he's, again, kind of more ant than he is robot. He's all about defending the colony. And he refers to Megatron as his queen, because obviously the leader of the ant colony is a queen, even though Megatron is not female. And you'll often get Megatron as Inferno goes off to do whatever evil he's been told to do, going, "Oh, I wish he'd stop calling me that." And so, it's sometimes genuinely funny, but also could be genuinely heartbreaking as you get characters changing over the course of the series. And I like the fact that a lot of what happens in Beast Machines, which is very related to Beast Wars, it was not like a reboot of some kind, even though stylistically it was in many ways. Looks like it should be just a sort of, not we're scraping it, we're doing something new. It's not. It's deeply tied to Beast Wars. If you watch one, you want to watch the other. And the developments to characters that happen in Beast Machines often stem from things that happened in the earlier Beast Wars, and they make sense. You may not love what some of these things are, but they do make sense. So Beast Wars is a solid sci-fi show. I mean, yes, it is geared a little bit more towards kids, but it's got more than enough to keep, I think, adults interested. And I think it has enough depth to it to be worth watching for kids, or again, for nostalgic adults. You might pick up on things that you didn't pick up on when you were a kid. Now, Beast Machines, you do get a pretty big redesign of the characters. And I remember at the time, pretty cool. It's very much of its time. This series premiered in 1999. Again, Mainframe Entertainment. Got 26 episodes over 2 seasons. So all in all, 88 episodes of these Beast Transformers. Developed by Marty Eisenberg and Bob Skir. Marv Wolfman did some of these as well, Lynn Wein as well. A lot of writers, and I'm not naming out all the writers. They all did a fantastic job. There's not really a bad episode. They're, I think, overall well written, well directed. The voice actors all do a great job, and they hold on to the voice actors through both of them. So from that standpoint, well worth watching. But you do get some interesting character redesigns. It's a slightly darker tone, and it's a slightly darker look, and can actually seem rather bleak at times. This is, from what I understand, the only Transformers cartoon, or at least up to that point, where the developers got to develop what they wanted to do with all 26 episodes. So they had a plan. They weren't just having to episode by episode, or let's do a few that time. They had an overarching plan for what they wanted to do with the story and with the characters. And they also got to design the characters separately from the toys. And in fact, they don't look much alike, from what I understand. Not much at all. And a lot of the characters from the toy line do not appear in here. They don't have a place. They weren't cramming characters in because they had to. So this is a much more earnest show. And again, gets into deeper themes that I think people can appreciate. In this series, the Beast Wars have apparently been won by the Maximals. And they're going back to Cybertron. Well, something happens in between Earth and Cybertron. And essentially it starts as Optimus sort of regains consciousness and slowly comes to realize who he is, and he's on the run. There are things trying to kill him. And he gathers together the other Maximals that have made it there. Cheetor, Rat Trap, Black Arachnia. And they're trying to figure out what's happened. What's happened? They're being hunted. They don't know why. Where are all the people, so to speak, on Cybertron? It seems to be empty. And so there's that starting mystery. We gradually figure out what has happened. And it, like I said, it gets into some deeper themes. The primary one being, it's really a story about totalitarianism. I know it seems heady, right? It seems pretentious. It's really not, though. Megatron has somehow made it back to Cybertron before them. And he has wiped out individuality on Cybertron. Nothing but drones initially. Because he's more or less insane. And he's decided for true harmony, you have to get rid of all individuality. Everything has to be subservient to him in order to have this perfect paradise with no organic elements at all. He's sort of disgusted with his organic elements, which he has retained. And obviously, the Maximals represent exactly what he hates. Now, the Maximals, well, they want harmony as well, but they want the harmony of individuals, free individuals, to voluntarily live in harmony with one another. So it really gets into that kind of deep territory, and not accidentally. It's very much on purpose. And, totalitarianism through technology, I think, is something a lot of us can really appreciate in this day and age. And here they are in 1999 doing a good job of it. Let's be honest, a lot of the craziness we've seen over the last few years has been predicted in science fiction going back into the 30s and probably before that. It almost seems like some of the folks trying to dominate mankind right now, either they're completely unconscious of what they're emulating, or they're very conscious of it and said, hey, that's a good idea. Let's try that. And you get that here. It's very legit sci-fi. And again, it really puts the characters through the ringer in Beast Machines. And the development, it makes sense and it's earned. It isn't just let's do it to do it. And, there's some stuff that, I'm not going to say heartbreaking, like I broke down and cried. No, but like stuff where you're going, oh, damn, no, that sucks. No, but it makes sense. It makes sense what they do with it. And it's kind of getting down to, the individual versus the collective, and the importance of freedom, and also nature versus technology. And in the first season of Beast Machines, it's sort of posited almost like it's one or the other. And in the second season, Optimus realizes, well, no, it's a balance. It's not going to be one or the other. He realizes that, for things to flourish, you can't have it your own way. That's the direction of Megatron. Really gets into some great themes. So I can't praise these shows enough from a variety. From a technology standpoint, it's really interesting to see the animation over the course of the series just get better and better, and also see some of the stuff that were maybe dead ends, a lot of textures and stuff like that at the time were like, oh, this is so cool, and now you kind of go, maybe it was a little bit overused, it wasn't quite right. But you also do see all that improvement. And from a story and character standpoint, these are far better shows than the original Transformers. God bless it, and I still love the originals, but having rewatched them a couple years ago, they're really best as kids' cartoons, action, adventure, etc. Beast Wars has a little bit more, well, let's say meat on the bone. And I highly suggest, if you've never watched them, but you're big into sci-fi, give them a look. You might be really surprised with what you find. And if you did watch them back in the 90s, maybe watch them again, because there are probably some deeper themes that maybe you didn't quite get when you were a kid, but that might have a lot of resonance for you today in the world you're trying to grapple with and grow up in and prosper in. So, were you a fan back in the day? Love to hear it in the comments. Love to hear your thoughts on this review and on the series. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer the best that I can. I really did enjoy this series, and I really do suggest it for people. Until next time, though, God bless everybody. Be kind to one another. And try to have some fun. And I will see you next time on Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.